This is the moment Donald Trump lost control of the American economy. This is the visual that is terrifying Wall Street this Tuesday morning. This is the notification that every Republican senator has been dreading more than their own re-election campaign. If you turned on your television at exactly 8:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, March 11th, 2026, you witnessed something that has never happened in modern American political history. You watched a sitting president get systematically destroyed on live television by a foreign leader who wasn't even in the same room. As of 9:24 p.m. that same evening, Donald Trump, already bleeding support from the business community, already facing rebellion from his own party leadership, and already watching his poll numbers crater in every swing state, was blindsided by the most devastating economic takedown ever broadcast on American soil. In this deep dive, we are going to show you the exact moment Mark Carney dropped the economic bomb that Wall Street is still reeling from. We are going to reveal the leaked conversation between Trump's Treasury Secretary and the CEOs who are now openly plotting his political destruction. We are going to expose the real numbers that prove American families will pay $200 more per year because of this trade war. And we are going to explain why the next 72 hours will determine whether Donald Trump survives this crisis or becomes the first modern president to be forced out by his own corporate donors. Donald Trump isn't just losing a political argument. He is watching the entire foundation of his economic credibility collapse in real time, while the cameras document every second of his humiliation. 6 weeks ago, Donald Trump stood in front of a massive crowd in Pennsylvania and made a promise that would define his entire presidency. He announced that he was launching the most aggressive trade protection program in American history. The plan was to impose sweeping tariffs on every single product coming across the Canadian border. It was supposed to punish Canada for what Trump called decades of unfair trade practices. It was supposed to force Canadian companies to move their operations to American soil. He promised American workers would see their wages rise by 15% within the first year. The announcement came during a freezing February evening in Pittsburgh. Trump stood on a stage surrounded by steel workers wearing hard hats and American flag jackets. He told them that Canada had been stealing their jobs for 30 years. He said that Canadian lumber was destroying American forestry towns. He claimed that Canadian dairy products were putting American farmers out of business. He promised that his tariffs would bring back the golden age of American manufacturing. The crowd erupted. They chanted his name. They believed every word. Trump's economic advisors had prepared a detailed implementation plan. The tariffs would start at 10% on basic goods, then escalate to 25% on strategic materials like steel and aluminum, and eventually reach 35% on luxury items and finished products. The White House projected that these tariffs would generate $200 billion in new revenue for the federal government. They claimed this money would fund massive infrastructure projects that would create 2 million new American jobs. They published charts showing how American factories would boom once Canadian competition was eliminated. But the cost wasn't just economic disruption. It was the complete destruction of the most stable, predictable, and profitable trade relationship in world history. This meant severing supply chains that took 50 years to build. This meant telling every major American corporation that the materials they depended on would suddenly cost 30% more overnight. This meant gambling that decades of integrated manufacturing processes could be redesigned in a matter of weeks. The business community tried to warn him. The CEO of General Motors personally called the White House and explained that shutting down Canadian imports would immediately halt production at 14 American factories. He sent detailed spreadsheets showing that GM alone sourced $47 billion worth of parts from Canadian suppliers every year. The head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a public statement arguing that tariffs don't punish foreign countries. They punish American consumers. Major Republican donors sent urgent messages begging Trump to reconsider. The National Association of Manufacturers released a report predicting that 340,000 American jobs would be lost in the first 6 months if the tariffs went into effect. But Donald Trump dismissed every objection. He went on television and told the American people that these business leaders were weak, that they had been bought off by Canadian lobbyists, that they didn't understand how trade actually worked. He called them cowards who were afraid of a little economic pressure. He said that real patriots would support short-term pain for long-term gain. He mocked the CEOs who opposed him, suggesting they cared more about their stock options than American workers. Trump gambled that Canada would never retaliate. He assumed that Prime Minister Mark Carney would do what every other world leader does when threatened by Washington. He assumed Carney would quietly negotiate behind closed doors, make a few symbolic concessions, and let Trump declare victory to his base. He assumed that Canada's economy was so dependent on American markets that they would have no choice but to surrender. He assumed wrong. At 8:03 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, March 10th, 2026, Mark Carney walked onto the set of America's highest-rated evening news program. The studio was cold. The lighting was stark. There were no cheering crowds, no dramatic music, no split screens showing Trump's reaction. There was only a desk, a camera, and a man who had spent the previous 72 hours preparing the most calculated economic counterattack in modern diplomatic history. The host welcomed Carney with the standard introduction. She mentioned his credentials as former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, and current prime minister. She noted that this was his first American television interview since Trump announced the tariffs. The atmosphere was tense. Every major news network had broken into their regular programming to carry the interview live. Trading floors across Manhattan went silent. Investment bankers stopped mid-con conversation to watch. When the DI host asked Carney if Canada was prepared to negotiate a compromise with President Trump, Carney did something extraordinary. He didn't answer the question. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, held it up to the camera, and said, "I want every American watching this to look at this number. This is your grocery bill from last month. Now, I want you to add $684 to that total. That's what President Trump's tariffs will cost your family every single month starting April 1st. The host tried to interrupt, tried to ask a follow-up question about diplomatic channels, but Carney raised his hand politely and continued. He wasn't there for a debate. He was there to deliver information. For the next 4 minutes, Carney didn't talk about diplomacy or international relations. He talked directly to American families. He explained that 73% of the fresh produce in American supermarkets during winter months comes from Canadian greenhouses. He named specific products. He said that the price of tomatoes would increase by $4.50 per pound. The price of lettuce would jump by $320 per head. The price of strawberries would nearly double. He explained that 64% of American prescription drugs are manufactured using ingredients sourced from Canadian pharmaceutical facilities, and that those costs would rise by an average of 22%. He pulled out photographs. The first showed a massive greenhouse complex in Ontario that supplies vegetables to 18 American states. He explained that this facility employs 3,000 Canadian workers and supports the livelihoods of 12,000 American grocery store employees who distribute those products. He said Trump's tariffs would make it economically impossible for this facility to continue serving American markets. Pause. But this was just the opening. While Carney was breaking down grocery costs on national television, Trump was watching from the White House. Residents and live tweeting his rage. While Trump was calling Carney a liar and demanding the networks cut away from the interview, Carney was pulling out a second document. And while Trump's staff was frantically calling network executives demanding they end the broadcast, Carney revealed the document that would change everything. It was an internal analysis from the Federal Reserve. The document, leaked to Carney by sources inside the American financial system, showed that Trump's tariffs would trigger an immediate 2.4% spike in inflation within 30 days. The analysis projected that core consumer prices would rise by 6.7% over the next 6 months. It estimated that the average American household would lose $19,400 in purchasing power by the end of the year. Carney looked into the camera and said, "Your president told you that tariffs would make America richer. The Federal Reserve's own economists say it will make you poorer. Who are you going to believe?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show emotion. He simply presented the numbers and let them speak. The financial markets reacted instantly. Within minutes of that statement, futures contracts for the S&P 500 dropped 340 points. The Dow Jones fell 890 points in after-hours trading. Currency traders started dumping dollars at a rate not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. The value of the U.S. dollar dropped 3.2% against the euro in 17 minutes. The Treasury Department's emergency hotline started ringing as panicked institutional investors demanded to know if the Federal Reserve numbers were real. Gold prices spiked by $89 per ounce as investors fled to safe haven assets. Bitcoin jumped 11% as crypto traders bet on dollar instability. Oil futures dropped $6 per barrel on fears of a coming recession. The volatility index, which measures market fear, surged to levels not seen since the pandemic lockdowns. The stock market doesn't care about political spin. It cares about mathematics. And the mathematics said that Donald Trump had just destroyed $1.7 trillion in American household wealth in a single evening. Retirement accounts that had been carefully built over decades lost substantial value in minutes. Pension funds that support millions of American retirees saw their portfolios crater. The economic damage was immediate, measurable, and undeniable. According to leaks from sources inside the Treasury Department, an emergency conference call took place at 9:15 p.m. that same night. We have learned from senior officials who were on that call that the panic was immediate and absolute. The participants included Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, and 3 CEOs whose names the sources would not reveal but described as representing the energy, automotive, and technology sectors. The topic was not how to respond to Carney's interview. The topic was how to prevent a complete economic meltdown when the markets opened Tuesday morning. Treasury Secretary Bessent opened the call with a single question: how bad is this? One of the CEOs responded, "We are looking at supply chain collapse by the end of the week. Our Canadian suppliers are already suspending shipments. We have 72 hours of inventory remaining." Kevin Hassett tried to defuse the situation. The president believes this is temporary pressure. Canada will negotiate. The same CEO interrupted, "I see Canada isn't negotiating. They just went on American television and declared economic war. They're not backing down. They're doubling down." Commerce Secretary Lutnick asked the critical question: what happens if we don't reverse the tariffs in the next 48 hours? There was silence on the call for nearly 10 seconds. Then, one of the unnamed executives said something that froze everyone. "Then we start layoffs. Permanent layoffs. We're talking about 150,000 American jobs in the first month." The decision was made on that call. It was a cold, calculated political survival decision. These CEOs looked at the Carney interview and saw a prime minister who had just proven he was willing to sacrifice Canadian economic interests to expose Trump's lies. They looked at the market reaction and saw billions of dollars evaporating. They realized Donald Trump had stopped being an asset to American business and had become an existential threat. The decision was made. They would go public with their opposition by Wednesday morning. Why did these corporate leaders do this? Follow the money. These CEOs are not loyal to Donald Trump. They are loyal to their shareholders, their quarterly earnings reports, and their stock prices. They wanted stable, predictable trade policies that allowed them to maximize profits. But Trump gave them chaos, uncertainty, and a prime minister willing to burn down the entire North American economy to prove a point. Sources say the CEOs and Trump's economic team had a follow-up call Tuesday at 6 GWAA. The message was clear: reverse the tariffs immediately or lose all corporate financial support for the 2026 midterm elections. This shifts power from the White House to the boardroom. Donald Trump can no longer control the economic narrative, can no longer claim he's protecting American workers, and can no longer pretend that tariffs are a winning strategy. He is just a politician trapped between his ego and economic reality. By attacking Canada, he is committing political suicide. When major corporate donors publicly abandon a sitting president, that signals the end of his ability to govern. What historians will call the Carney moment is the point where economic reality overtook political rhetoric. This isn't a normal trade dispute. This is a sitting president being forced to choose between admitting he was catastrophically wrong or driving the American economy into a recession to protect his pride. The legal ramifications are unprecedented. The Federal Trade Commission has announced it is opening an investigation into whether Trump's tariffs violated administrative procedures. The claims include failure to conduct proper economic impact assessments, bypassing required congressional consultation, and implementing tariffs based on personal grievances rather than national security interests. This isn't political opposition from Democrats. This is the Federal Trade Commission, an independent regulatory body challenging the president's authority. If this investigation proceeds, that could trigger a constitutional crisis over executive power and economic policy. Here's the domino effect. If Trump refuses to reverse the tariffs, then corporate donations to Republican campaigns stop completely. If corporate donations stop, then Republican senators facing tight re-election races will publicly break with Trump to save their own political careers. If Republican senators break with Trump, then he loses the ability to pass any legislation or confirm any appointees. If he loses legislative power, then he becomes the weakest president since Jimmy Carter. We're looking at complete political paralysis for the next 18 months. The timeline is accelerating. Manufacturing facilities across the Midwest are already announcing temporary shutdowns. A steel plant in Pennsylvania posted notices that 2,400 workers will be furloughed starting next Monday. An automotive parts supplier in Michigan told employees that without Canadian aluminum, they will run out of materials by March 20th. A food processing company in Wisconsin that packages Canadian agricultural products announced it will begin permanent layoffs by the end of the month. These aren't threats. These are scheduled operational decisions being made by companies that can see the cliff approaching. China is watching this. President Xi Jinping sees that Donald Trump launched a trade war against America's closest ally and got destroyed on American television by a prime minister with a spreadsheet. Chinese state media is already running stories about American weakness and economic instability. Russia is calculating that a politically weakened Trump has zero ability to project strength on the world stage. Vladimir Putin sees an opportunity to test American resolve, knowing that Trump is consumed by a self-inflicted economic crisis. Iran is testing whether American economic threats still carry any credibility. A desperate president who just got humiliated by Canada can be ignored, manipulated, or provoked without consequence. America's adversaries are realizing that Trump's threats are hollow because he can't even manage trade relations with the country that shares a 5,500-mile border and has been our most reliable ally for over a century. Where is Elon Musk? Silence. Where is Jeff Bezos? Silence. Where is Tim Cook? Silence. These men who were photographed shaking hands with Trump at White House dinners have not posted a single word of support. Why? Because they are positioning themselves for the post-Trump era. They are quietly meeting with congressional leaders to discuss how to repair trade relationships after Trump leaves office. They are distancing themselves from a president who proved he values his ego more than economic stability. According to sources who spoke to Bloomberg News, at least 3 major tech CEOs held a private video conference on Tuesday morning to coordinate their response. The consensus was simple. Do not defend Trump publicly. Do not attack him directly and wait for the Republican establishment to solve the problem. One source described it as letting him drown without getting our hands dirty. This creates a split in the Republican coalition that cannot be healed. On one side, the MAGA loyalists who believe Trump can do no wrong, who think standing up to Canada is a sign of strength, and who are willing to accept higher prices as the cost of national pride. They see Carney's interview as foreign interference. They believe the Federal Reserve numbers are fake. They trust Trump over economists, data, and their own grocery bills. On the other side, the business conservatives who care about profit margins, stock portfolios, and economic growth, who see Trump's tariffs as reckless economic vandalism. These are people who voted for Trump because they wanted tax cuts and deregulation, not trade wars with allied nations. They're seeing their retirement accounts lose value, and they're furious. A divided Republican Party cannot win the 2026 midterms. A divided Republican Party cannot protect Trump from investigations, impeachment threats, or primary challenges. A divided Republican Party cannot govern. Reports from sources close to the White House describe a president who is not sleeping. He is reportedly watching the Carney interview on a loop, pausing it repeatedly, shouting at the television screen. He keeps asking his staff, how did he get those Federal Reserve numbers? Who leaked them? Who betrayed me? One aide told the Washington Post that Trump has become obsessed with the idea that someone inside his own administration is working against him. He is experiencing what psychologists would call a narcissistic collapse triggered by public intellectual defeat. Staff are reportedly keeping certain advisors away from him because they fear he will order even more extreme retaliatory measures. There are concerns he might attempt to fire Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve chairman, or declare some form of economic emergency that would give him unilateral authority to control trade policy without congressional oversight. The grocery bill numbers aren't just statistics. They're a weapon. Every American family who walks into a supermarket next week and sees higher prices will remember that Mark Carney warned them this would happen. Every worker who gets laid off because their company can't get Canadian materials will know that Trump caused it. Every Republican politician who has to defend these tariffs in a town hall meeting will face voters who are angrier than they've ever been. While Trump is isolated and spiraling, while his corporate donors are abandoning ship, while Republican senators are privately discussing how to distance themselves from his policies, Mark Carney is planning his next move. Sources in Ottawa say Carney is preparing to release detailed economic impact reports for every single U.S. state, showing exactly how many jobs in each state depend on Canadian trade. He's turning this into a surgical political strike, targeting Republican senators in swing states with data that proves their own constituents will be devastated by Trump's policies. So where are we? Donald Trump is isolated in the White House, surrounded by advisors who are terrified to tell him the truth. The corporate donors have turned on him. The financial markets have turned on him. His own Treasury Department has turned on him. He is simultaneously the most powerful person in the world, and yet completely powerless to stop the economic disaster he created. As we head into the next 72 hours, expect escalation. Trump will try to attack. Carney personally, calling him a liar, a socialist, a threat to American sovereignty. He might try to impose additional tariffs on Canadian energy exports in a desperate attempt to force Canada to back down. He could even declare an economic state of emergency, an attempt to use wartime powers to control prices and supply chains. But the one thing he cannot do is undo the damage. The credibility is shattered. The trust is gone. When corporate America abandons you, there's no coming back. The North American trade relationship is broken. The assumption that Canada would always prioritize good relations with Washington over economic self-interest is dead. When Mark Carney chose to go on American television instead of negotiating quietly, he fundamentally changed how smaller nations deal with American economic bullying. Subscribe. We will be monitoring the New York Stock Exchange opening bell Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. If the Dow drops another 1,000 points, we will go live immediately to break down what that means for your retirement accounts. This is the turning point. This is the moment everything changed. Stay informed. The next chapter of this crisis begins in less than 24